The town of Redstone lay under a late autumn sun that cast long, slanting shadows across its dusty streets. Wooden storefronts lined the main avenue, their paint peeling and shutters clattering in the cold breeze. The wind carried the faint scent of livestock and wood smoke, and townsfolk hurried past one another, heads down, intent on finishing chores before nightfall. Children scurried along the edges of the street, their laughter barely rising above the creaking of wagon wheels and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Life in Redstone was hard, relentless, and unforgiving, especially to those who were overlooked. On the wooden porch of the trading post, an elderly woman sat quietly. Her silver hair was tucked beneath a faded bonnet, and her hands trembled as she clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest. Her eyes, pale but sharp, scanned the street again and again, hoping for a familiar face. The townsfolk, however, passed by without a second glance. Some were too busy, others too weary, and some simply chose to look the other way. In the eyes of Redstone, she was invisible. She was Eleanor Prescott, though nobody in town knew it. To them, she was a frail, wandering old woman, just another fixture of the quiet streets. Yet beneath her quiet demeanor lay decades of experience, wisdom, and wealth accumulated through careful stewardship of the land and her late husband's ranching empire. Her life, though largely hidden from view, shaped the valley in ways most would never imagine. And on this cold autumn afternoon, that hidden life was about to intersect with someone who would change everything. Caleb Turner rode into town on his horse, Dusty, the familiar scrape of hooves against the hard-packed dirt echoing off the empty storefronts. He was 20, lean, and sunburned from long days working at the Broken Saddle Ranch. His coat was patched in several places, and his boots bore the scuffs of countless hours in the saddle. Caleb had little more than the few coins earned delivering supplies and messages across the valley, but he carried himself with quiet determination and a sense of fairness that often went unnoticed. He had a delivery to make before sundown, an errand that would earn him just enough to cover his rent. The thought of returning to the cold, drafty bunkhouse made him quicken his pace. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed her, the old woman, alone on the porch, clutching her satchel as if it were a lifeline. Her gaze was distant yet searching, her lips parted slightly as though she might call out for help, but no sound came. Most riders would have kept going, focused on their own chores. But Caleb felt a nudge of something stronger than routine. He pulled Dusty to a slow stop, careful not to startle her. "Evening, ma'am," he said gently, tipping his hat. "Are you waitin' for someone?" The woman's eyes flicked to his, uncertain. I think so," she replied softly. "Or maybe they're waitin' for me." Her voice wavered, frail but sincere, carrying a faint note of hope. Caleb glanced at the sky, noting the sun slipping lower. His delivery would take another hour, and he could feel the chill creeping in. Every practical thought urged him to move along, to finish the task that paid the rent and kept a roof over his head. But as he looked at her, at the quiet desperation etched into her features, he felt the weight of another choice, the kind that could change the course of a life. "I'll help you get home," Caleb said finally, without hesitation. Her face brightened, a flicker of relief crossing her features. "Oh, would you?" "I'd be so grateful," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. It was a small act, a simple gesture, yet in that moment it carried the power to shift the path of both their lives. Caleb adjusted Dusty's saddle, extended a hand, and together they set out down the worn trail that led from Redstone into the mountains beyond, unaware that the journey ahead would reveal secrets, test courage, and forge a bond neither of them could have imagined. The autumn wind whispered through the canyon as Dusty trotted forward, Caleb leading the way, and Eleanor clinging to the promise that, for the first time in years, someone had truly seen her. The trail out of Redstone was narrow and winding, carved long ago by cattle drives and stagecoaches. Dusty's hooves crunched against loose stones as Caleb led Eleanor along the path, the valley stretching wide beneath them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hills, painting the landscape in warm golds and browns, yet the chill of approaching evening lingered in the crisp mountain air. Caleb kept a steady hand on the reins, guiding Dusty carefully over rocky stretches and uneven ground. Eleanor, wrapped in her worn cloak, held tightly to her satchel, occasionally glancing over the valley below. Though her movements were slow, there was a grace to her posture, a quiet strength that suggested a lifetime spent navigating rough terrain. She hummed softly as they rode, a faint tune from her youth, one that Caleb couldn't place but found oddly comforting. As they climbed higher, the trail grew treacherous. Loose stones threatened to unseat Dusty, and narrow ledges hugged the side of cliffs. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear of the heights, but from the weight of responsibility. He had no experience guiding a passenger through paths like these, and the thought of failing, of letting her fall, sent a cold shiver down his spine. Yet Eleanor's calm presence steadied him. She spoke in soft tones, pointing out familiar landmarks, telling stories of the mountains and the wildlife she had known for decades. "You've traveled these trails often," Caleb said, trying to sound casual despite the tension in his hands. "Oh, many times," Eleanor replied. "These hills know me as well as I know them. My husband and I rode them every season, checking the herds, mapping water sources, ensuring the valley remained ours to care for." She paused, a wistful look passing over her face. "Few people understand the land as we do. Few remember it, even when they live among it." Caleb studied her, noticing the glimmer of intelligence and experience in her pale eyes. There was something beneath her frailty, a depth he hadn't expected. "I'd never have guessed," he said. "You don't look like someone who's owned half a valley." Eleanor chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Appearance is deceiving, Mr. Turner. People see what they want, or what they expect to see. Most would glance at me on a porch and think I'm harmless, a simple old woman. Few would guess the responsibility I've carried, the decisions I've made, the lives that depended on them." Caleb nodded thoughtfully, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that in helping her, he had stumbled into a world far larger than his own, a world built on trust, integrity, and the quiet strength of those who endure when others fail to notice. The ride continued, Dusty struggling under the combined weight of the journey and the rocky trail. Caleb's arms ached, his muscles tightened, but he refused to let fatigue slow him. Every step forward was a step toward safety, toward trust, and toward the unknown. Eleanor seemed to sense his thoughts, offering small reassurances. "You've a good heart, Caleb," she said quietly. "It shows in the choices you make, even when you don't know the full consequences. Not many young men would have stopped to help me." Caleb felt warmth rise in his chest at her words, but it was tinged with unease. He was giving up more than just time. His delivery, his rent, the fragile balance of his daily life, it all hung in the balance. Yet he knew, in that quiet, shared moment, that he had made the right choice. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the canyon walls, and the first hints of evening mist began to creep along the path. Caleb tightened his grip on Dusty's reins, guiding them through a narrow switchback. Eleanor's satchel brushed against her side, a small reminder of the life she carried with her, a life hidden from the world yet filled with untold stories and unclaimed power. As the first stars began to pierce the twilight, Caleb realized that this journey was no longer just about leading a woman home. It was about discovery, of courage, of character, and of the truths that sometimes only reveal themselves to those willing to look beneath the surface. And with each careful step, each shared story, Caleb felt the weight of possibility pressing against him. The night ahead would be dark, the path uncertain, and the secrets of Prescott Canyon waiting. Yet he would not falter. In helping Eleanor Prescott, he was already on the path to a future far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The path grew steeper as Caleb guided Dusty through Prescott Canyon. The sun had nearly vanished behind the mountains, leaving the valley bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Shadows stretched across the cliffs, and the air carried the scent of pine, dry grass, and the faint tang of distant water. Every step felt heavier, but Caleb refused to slow. He knew Eleanor's safety depended on him, and the thought of failing her was unbearable. Finally, the trail opened into a wide expanse. Before them lay a sprawling estate, more magnificent than anything Caleb had ever seen. Fields of golden grass rolled toward timbered ridges, barns and corrals dotted the landscape, and the main house rose proudly at the heart of it all. The stone walls glimmered faintly in the fading light, and smoke curled lazily from chimneys, hinting at warmth and life within. Caleb's jaw dropped. Is this yours?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's pale eyes softened, a faint smile touching her lips. "Yes," she said quietly. "It has been mine for many years. My husband and I built it together. Half the valley rests under our care." She adjusted her grip on the satchel and turned her gaze back to the winding trail they had just traveled. Few know its true scope. Fewer still would guess the person who guides them through Redstone is its owner. Caleb felt a mix of awe and disbelief. His mind raced. All those faces in town that had ignored her, every merchant, every passerby, had walked past someone who could have changed their fortunes. And he, a struggling ranch hand with nothing to his name, had risked his livelihood, his rent, and even the safety of his horse to help her. He dismounted, leading Dusty toward a stable. I had no idea," he admitted, still taking in the estate. "I risked so much, and I didn't even know who I was helping." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable yet warm. "Caleb, it is not the wealth that defines a person, nor the comfort they may enjoy. It is the choices they make when they know nothing of what might come that reveal their character." Her words settled over him, heavy yet comforting. "You helped me because it was right, not because you expected anything in return. That is rare. That is precious." Caleb swallowed hard, the weight of her meaning pressing down. He had acted without thought of reward, guided only by instinct and kindness. And in doing so, he had proven himself in a way he had never imagined. The first stars began to shimmer above the valley as Eleanor gestured toward the main house. "Come," she said softly. "You've done enough for one day. Let me show you inside." As they walked, Caleb felt a strange combination of humility and hope. He had expected a simple, grateful nod, perhaps a meal, maybe a coin in thanks. Instead, he had stumbled into a world of grandeur and responsibility, one that demanded courage, discretion, and honesty. The front doors swung open, revealing the warmth of a fire-lit hall, walls lined with rich wood, and shelves filled with books, ledgers, and artifacts collected over decades. Eleanor moved with familiarity, guiding him gently. Caleb followed, wide-eyed, each step cementing the realization that his life had shifted irreversibly. He thought of the delivery he had missed in Redstone, the rent he might owe, and the uncertainty of his future. And yet, for the first time, those worries seemed small, almost trivial, compared to the opportunity before him, not just to witness this world, but to participate in it, to learn from it, to grow. Eleanor paused at a large window overlooking the valley. "This is the land we've cared for, Caleb. Every acre, every herd, every stream. All of it rests on decisions made with integrity and thought. And soon, perhaps, it will rest in the hands of someone who understands that as you do." Caleb's chest tightened. He had already chosen kindness, and in return, he was offered trust, mentorship, and the chance to shape a future far beyond what he had imagined riding into Redstone that afternoon. The choice he had made was already paying dividends, yet it was only the beginning. The wind whispered through the trees outside, carrying the scent of possibility. Caleb knew that from this moment forward, the path ahead would demand courage, wisdom, and heart. But as he looked at Eleanor, the woman who had appeared frail yet commanded the valley with quiet strength, he realized he was ready to take it on. For in helping her, he had discovered the first truth of life: sometimes the smallest acts of kindness uncover the greatest secrets, and the greatest opportunities. The next morning, Prescott Canyon awoke to a quiet brilliance. Golden sunlight spilled over rolling pastures, illuminating the barns and corrals, the main house standing proudly in the center of it all. Caleb rose early, his body still weary from the climb and the previous day's ride, but his mind buzzed with anticipation. Eleanor Prescott awaited him in the sunlit hall, her presence calm yet commanding, a mixture of warmth and authority that made him both eager and nervous. "You did well yesterday, Caleb," she said, her eyes scanning him with a discerning gaze. "Not many would have risked their own safety for another. It takes more than courage, it takes character. And that is something you possess in abundance." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Praise had never been part of his life. Survival, diligence, and quiet obedience were. Yet Eleanor's words carried weight beyond flattery. They spoke of trust, of potential recognized, and of a path that could change his life entirely. She led him into the study, a large room filled with maps, ledgers, and plans for the valley's lands and water systems. "There is much to learn," Eleanor explained. "Managing an estate like this is not simply a matter of feeding cattle or repairing fences. It is a balance of land, resources, people, and foresight. If you are willing, I will teach you." Caleb's heart skipped. You want me to work for you?" he asked, uncertain. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Not just to work. To learn. To manage. To understand the valley as I have. You will start as my assistant manager. You will oversee the herds, the land, and eventually, decisions that affect many lives. If you prove yourself, you will become more than a ranch hand. You will become a steward of this valley." The scope of her offer was staggering. Caleb had spent his life worrying about rent, food, and keeping Dusty fed. Now, he faced lessons in leadership, economics, land management, and the intricate politics of a valley's livelihoods. The responsibility was enormous, but it carried a promise of growth, knowledge, and respect that no coin could buy. The first days were testing. Caleb learned to read the land, to follow the patterns of the herds, and to anticipate problems before they arose. Eleanor observed him closely, offering guidance without interference, allowing him to make mistakes but always with gentle correction. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, Caleb struggled to manage a group of restless cattle. Eleanor watched silently, letting him take the lead, though he could feel her sharp eyes measuring each decision. When one young steer broke free, Caleb felt panic rise, but he remembered her words, integrity, foresight, and calm resolve. He guided the herd back without incident, Dusty's hooves thundering across the open pasture, and Eleanor nodded in approval. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "Leadership is not about force or fear. It is about patience, judgment, and understanding. You have the makings of it, Caleb. But remember, the valley tests all who step into its care." Caleb realized that Eleanor's mentorship was more than lessons in ranching. She taught him about trust, empathy, and decision-making that affected not just the land, but people. He met the workers, some wary of a young stranger in charge, others curious about his character. Each day, he earned respect not through wealth or position, but through consistency, fairness, and effort. As days turned into weeks, Caleb grew in confidence. He learned to navigate the complexities of water rights, grazing patterns, and estate management. His hands bore the marks of labor, yet his posture straightened, and a quiet authority began to settle into his presence. He still remembered the bench at the Redstone trading post, the moment he had paused to help Eleanor. That single act of kindness had unlocked a world he never imagined, and he carried its lesson with him into every decision. Evenings were spent in the study, reviewing ledgers and plans, discussing strategy and stewardship. Eleanor challenged him, questioned him, and inspired him to think beyond the immediate, to plan for the valley's future and the people who depended on it. Caleb felt the weight of responsibility, yet with it came pride, purpose, and a sense of belonging he had never known. By the time the first frost touched the valley, Caleb Turner was no longer just a struggling ranch hand. He was a man growing into his potential, guided by wisdom, tempered by experience, and strengthened by the quiet, steady mentorship of Eleanor Prescott. The valley around them stretched in golden quiet, promising challenge, growth, and the slow, steady reward of a life lived with character. Caleb knew that the real tests were only beginning, and that the choices he made next would define not only his future, but the legacy of the valley itself. Winter approached Prescott Canyon with a crisp, biting wind that swept across the hills and rattled the shutters of the estate. Caleb Turner had settled into a rhythm of work and learning, but the valley was far from predictable. Managing the land, the herds, and the people was a delicate balance, and each day presented new challenges. Caleb now oversaw multiple ranch hands, guiding their labor while ensuring fairness and efficiency. Some of the older men, wary of a young man suddenly in charge, tested his authority. Others were skeptical, reluctant to follow instructions from someone who had only recently arrived from Redstone. Caleb learned quickly that leadership demanded more than knowledge. It required respect, patience, and consistency. His decisions could affect lives, livelihoods, and the delicate ecosystem of the valley. Eleanor observed him closely, offering guidance but rarely interfering. "Remember, Caleb," she said one morning as they walked along a ridge overlooking the pastures, "every choice you make ripples farther than you can see. Decisions about water, grazing, or wages affect more than cattle, they affect families. Your integrity must guide you even when no one watches." Caleb nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent years focused on survival, but now survival was only part of the picture. He was responsible for fairness, for justice, and for the well-being of everyone under his care. The valley demanded vigilance, and Caleb found himself questioning every move, every command. Could he truly handle this? Could a young man with no formal training manage such responsibility? Doubt crept into his mind, whispering that he might fail, that his good intentions might not be enough. One evening, after a long day overseeing the herds, Caleb paused at the edge of the pastures. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, casting the valley in shadow. He remembered the bench at the Redstone trading post, where he had first met Eleanor, and the simple act of kindness that had begun this journey. That small decision, made without expectation of reward, had opened doors he never imagined. It reminded him that character was forged in choices, not circumstance. Yet the challenges were growing. A dispute arose over water rights, as neighboring ranchers questioned the boundaries of Prescott Canyon's streams. Caleb had to negotiate, balancing firmness with diplomacy, or risk sparking conflict that could ripple through the valley. He spent hours poring over maps, measuring flow, and speaking with both his workers and the neighbors. Each choice carried potential consequences, and he felt the tension in his chest tighten. Through it all, Eleanor remained a steady presence. She guided him in planning, asked questions to challenge his thinking, and reminded him that leadership was about more than authority, it was about understanding, patience, and wisdom. "You are learning, Caleb," she said one morning as they reviewed a ledger. "Mistakes will come, but how you respond to them defines you. Integrity and foresight matter more than experience alone." Caleb found himself growing not only in skill but in confidence. He began to anticipate challenges, to see patterns in the herds, the land, and the people. He realized that the valley's strength depended on his judgment, and that each decision, no matter how small, had the potential to create or prevent disaster. Even so, self-doubt lingered. Could he truly live up to Eleanor's expectations? Could he manage the estate, care for the workers, and protect the legacy of the Prescott lands? The pressure was constant, yet with each day, Caleb discovered that courage was not the absence of doubt, it was moving forward despite it. By the time the first snow dusted the canyon floor, Caleb had become a man in the truest sense of the word, responsible, thoughtful, and tested by the demands of life in the valley. The challenges were far from over, but he now understood that success would not come from luck or wealth alone, it would come from integrity, perseverance, and the lessons Eleanor had patiently taught him. As the stars glittered over the quiet valley, Caleb felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. The estate, the people, and the future of Prescott Canyon depended on him, and he was ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. For the first time, he understood that life was not merely about survival, it was about shaping a legacy that mattered. Spring arrived in Prescott Canyon, bringing the scent of wildflowers and the promise of renewal across the valley. Caleb Turner had grown into his role, respected by the ranch hands and trusted by Eleanor Prescott. But a new challenge loomed, one that would test not just his skill and judgment, but the courage and integrity that had carried him this far. Eleanor had spent months guiding Caleb, sharing knowledge of the land, cattle, water rights, and the people who depended on both. Now, she presented him with a decision that could change the valley forever. "Caleb," she said one morning as they walked along the ridge overlooking the estate, "I want you to consider something more than managing land or herds. I want you to consider how we can give back, how we can offer opportunity to those with potential but no means. The Turner Prescott Settlement Program could do that. But it will not be easy. You will face opposition, skepticism, and risk. It will test your judgment, your courage, and your commitment to integrity." Caleb felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. Launching such a program would require resources, careful planning, and navigating the politics of the valley. Neighbors might resent it. Townsfolk might doubt it. Failure could ruin him, erode trust, and undo the years of progress he had fought to achieve. Yet, deep down, he understood that this was the next step, an extension of the same kindness that had guided him when he first helped Eleanor Prescott. Over the next weeks, Caleb worked tirelessly, drafting plans for the settlement program. He met with young ranch hands, widows, and families struggling to make ends meet. He calculated land allocation, livestock distribution, and training programs. Every decision was scrutinized, every step weighed against possible risks. But Caleb never wavered, driven by a conviction that integrity and effort could shape more than just his own life, they could create a legacy. When the day came to officially launch the Turner Prescott Settlement Program, Caleb stood at the edge of the first cleared plot of land. Young families gathered, hopeful and uncertain, their hands filled with tools and determination. Ranch hands worked side by side with them, guided by Caleb's careful instructions. Eleanor watched from a distance, her expression one of quiet pride and cautious optimism. "You've grown far beyond a simple ranch hand," Eleanor whispered. "You've become someone who can change lives, Caleb. Remember what brought you here. Remember the bench at the trading post and the choice you made. That same heart brought you here, and it will carry you forward." Caleb nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The wind swept across the valley, carrying the scent of fresh earth, blooming flowers, and possibility. The first families began planting, building, and learning, and Caleb moved among them, offering guidance, encouragement, and reassurance. He saw the hope in their eyes, the spark of potential waiting to be realized, and he felt the truth of Eleanor's words: integrity and kindness could shape the future in ways even wealth could not. Challenges arose almost immediately. One neighbor questioned the program, concerned it would disrupt grazing rights. A young family struggled to adapt to the new responsibilities, and a sudden spring storm threatened crops before they could take root. Caleb faced each problem head-on, using every lesson Eleanor had taught him, balancing fairness with resolve, patience with action. By nightfall, as the storm cleared and stars reflected in puddles across the freshly tilled land, Caleb stood silently, surveying the settlement. Families huddled in tents and temporary shelters, exhausted but proud. Ranch hands rested nearby, grateful for guidance. And Eleanor, watching from the ridge, smiled knowingly. Caleb realized, in that quiet moment, that he had not only built a settlement, he had built trust, hope, and a future that extended beyond himself. The risks had been real, the opposition fierce, but he had acted with courage and integrity, proving that a single choice, an act of kindness at a trading post, could ripple outward to shape countless lives. The valley was alive with possibility, and Caleb understood fully that leadership was not about fear or wealth. It was about heart, vision, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The Turner Prescott Settlement Program was only the beginning. And in the quiet after the storm, with the first families settling under the twilight sky, Caleb knew that the greatest trials had been met, and the greatest lessons had been learned. The valley of Prescott Canyon basked in the gentle glow of early morning. Mist curled along the hillsides, the sun's first rays spilling over pastures and barns, setting the world aglow with soft gold. Caleb Turner mounted Dusty, the horse steady beneath him, and looked out across the land he had helped shape. The Turner-Prescott settlement program was thriving. Small clusters of families worked side by side, planting crops, tending livestock, and building homes. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a living testament to effort, care, and community. Caleb rode slowly, taking in the view, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. It had been years since he had first paused at the trading post to help an old woman whose presence had gone unnoticed by everyone else. That single choice had set him on this path, a journey that had tested his courage, honed his judgment, and strengthened his character. He now understood Eleanor Prescott's wisdom more fully than ever. Integrity and kindness could shape lives in ways even wealth and power could not. As he rode toward the road that led to Redstone, Caleb's mind traced the path of his life. From the struggles of surviving at the Broken Saddle Ranch, through the treacherous trails of the canyon, to managing the vast estate and launching a program that would change the futures of so many, he could see the thread that connected every moment. Each choice, each act of compassion, had led him here. And the lessons learned, the value of honesty, courage, patience, and empathy, were ones he would carry always. The town of Redstone emerged from the morning haze, quiet but awakening. Caleb slowed Dusty, letting the horse's hooves echo softly along the main street. He recognized the familiar buildings, the dusty porches, and even a few of the faces who had ignored Eleanor years ago. Yet the town now looked different to him. He saw potential, history, and resilience woven into every corner. He also saw the young and struggling, those who might, one day, follow the same path he had, if only someone extended a helping hand. Pausing near the old trading post, Caleb remembered the bench where he had first noticed Eleanor Prescott, alone and unseen. He dismounted, running a hand along the worn wood. How fragile the world had seemed then, how simple yet profound a single act of kindness could be. He had learned that character was measured not by wealth or recognition, but by choices made in quiet moments when no one else was watching. Caleb mounted again and continued through the streets, nodding to townsfolk who recognized him with respect, though some remained unaware of the stories he carried. He didn't seek their admiration, nor did he need it. What mattered was the legacy of integrity and generosity, the lives touched, and the example set for those who would follow. As Dusty trotted steadily along the edge of town, Caleb glimpsed a young boy struggling to lead a stubborn mule down a narrow street. The scene mirrored his own first encounter with Eleanor years ago. Without hesitation, he guided the boy gently, offering a few words of advice and encouragement. The boy's face brightened, the mule straightened, and Caleb smiled quietly to himself. The cycle continued. Kindness and integrity, once given, grew beyond measure. By midday, Caleb rode out of Redstone, the town receding behind him as the vast valley opened before him. The Turner-Prescott settlement program flourished, the estate ran smoothly, and the people he had helped were thriving. Yet despite the wealth, responsibility, and respect he now carried, he remained humble, a man shaped not by fortune, but by choices guided by heart. He looked up at the sky, the wind lifting his coat and tousling his hair. Eleanor Prescott's voice echoed in memory, "Experience can be taught. Integrity cannot." Caleb nodded to himself. Everything he had achieved began with a single act of kindness, and everything that followed was built upon the foundation of character, courage, and care. As Dusty's hooves carried him along the trail toward the horizon, Caleb Turner felt a profound peace. The valley stretched endlessly ahead, full of promise, challenge, and possibility. And he knew that wherever life led next, he would meet it with the same steadfast heart that had first seen and helped an old woman sitting alone on a trading post porch. In the quiet majesty of the frontier, Caleb understood the deepest truth of all: the measure of a life was not wealth, power, or recognition, but the lives touched, the kindness given, and the integrity upheld when no one else was watching. Years passed in Prescott Canyon, and the valley itself seemed to hum with life, resilience, and promise. The Turner-Prescott settlement program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, its fields rich with crops, herds thriving under careful stewardship, and families building homes filled with hope and laughter. Caleb Turner, once a struggling ranch hand with little more than a patched coat and a faithful horse, had become a man respected and admired throughout the region, not for his wealth, but for the integrity, courage, and kindness that guided every decision he made. Caleb rode along the familiar trails, now confident and steady, his posture upright, eyes sharp with awareness, yet softened by experience. Dusty carried him across the valley, and the wind lifted his coat like a banner of all he had accomplished. Each step, each hill, each stretch of open land reminded him of the path that had brought him here, the quiet moment at a redstone trading post when he had noticed an old woman, the decision to help her despite knowing nothing of her identity, and the journey that had unfolded from that single act of compassion. He paused at the edge of a new settlement, where a young family worked to build a barn. The father struggled to guide a stubborn steer, the mother carrying a small child on her hip. Caleb recognized the same uncertainty, the same mixture of fear and hope, that had mirrored his own first steps into the world of responsibility years before. Without hesitation, he offered guidance, showing patience, encouragement, and understanding. The family's faces lit up with relief and gratitude. It was a small moment, but Caleb understood its significance. In each act of kindness, the cycle of hope continued. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers, of earth freshly turned, of smoke curling from a distant chimney. Caleb thought of Eleanor Prescott, now older but still sharp, still guiding, still watching over the valley with the quiet wisdom that had first shaped him. She had taught him that experience could be shared, skills could be taught, but integrity, courage, and compassion could not be learned. They had to be chosen, lived, and upheld. Every choice he had made, every challenge he had faced, had been a reflection of that truth. Caleb continued riding, passing the trading post where it all began. The bench where Eleanor had sat so many years ago remained, worn by time and weather, yet solid and steadfast. He dismounted for a moment, running a hand along the familiar wood. He remembered the hesitation, the quiet fear, and the determination that had led him to act. A simple choice, unnoticed by the world at the time, had set in motion everything that followed. The valley, the people, the program, and even his own life had been shaped by that one act of kindness. As the sun rose higher, casting its light across the canyon, Caleb mounted Dusty again and rode into the heart of the valley. He looked out at the families working, the children running freely, the herds grazing peacefully, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Wealth, status, and recognition mattered little compared to the legacy of integrity and compassion he had helped create. And in that moment, he understood the truest measure of a life. It was not the land one owned, nor the possessions amassed, but the lives touched, the guidance offered, and the kindness freely given. Caleb Turner had learned that sometimes the smallest gestures, an act of help, a moment of understanding, could ripple outward, shaping futures, building hope, and revealing the greatest truths about the world and about ourselves. The valley stretched endlessly ahead, full of promise and possibility, and Caleb rode forward, knowing that the cycle of compassion would continue long after him. In the quiet majesty of Prescott Canyon, he smiled, understanding that a life lived with integrity and heart could transform not just a single person, but an entire community. For Caleb Turner, and for all who would follow, the lesson was clear: in a harsh world, kindness endures, integrity matters, and even the smallest choice can change everything. Did you enjoy Caleb's journey? Hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss another Wild West story of courage, kindness, and adventure.